Real stories. Extreme survival. No fiction. Welcome to Stories by Candlelight.
It is a primal, rhythmic howling that strips away the heat from your bones and the hope from your heart. To the uninitiated, the Arctic wasteland looks like a beautiful, pristine dream of white horizons and shimmering ice. But to those stranded within its frozen grip, it is a vast, indifferent graveyard. This is not a place built for life. It is a place where chemistry slows down, where metal becomes brittle enough to shatter like glass, and where a single exposed inch of skin can freeze solid in less than 60 seconds. The story of survival begins not with a roar of defiance, but with the desperate, ragged breath of a person realizing they are utterly alone. Imagine the silence that follows a plane crash or the snapping of a sled runner. It is a heavy, crushing silence that feels like physical weight. In this environment, the first rule of survival is simple yet brutal. Sweat is your enemy. In the world of the living, sweat cools you down. In the Arctic, sweat is a death sentence. As it dampens your base layers, it strips away your insulation, turning your own body's cooling mechanism into a conductor for the killing frost. The sun here is a liar. It hangs low on the horizon, a pale gold disk that offers light but no warmth. It mocks the shivering survivor, casting long, distorted shadows across the pressure ridges of the ice. To survive the first hour, one must master the art of the self-check. You must constantly wiggle your toes, touch your nose, and squint your eyes too. Ensure that frostbite hasn't already begun its silent invasion. The transition from life to ice is subtle. It begins with frostnip, a whitening of the skin, a tingling sensation like needles. If you do not warm that spot immediately, the cells crystallize. The liquid inside your flesh turns to jagged shards of ice, shredding the delicate walls of your veins and nerves. As the first day wanes, the psychological pressure begins to mount. In the Arctic wasteland, distance is an illusion. Without trees, buildings, or landmarks to provide scale, a mountain 50 miles away can look like a hill within walking distance. Many have died walking toward a horizon that never gets closer, burning through their precious caloric reserves until their heart simply stops. The survivor must learn to measure progress not in miles, but in breaths. Every step through waist-deep snow is a calculated gamble. To fall is to risk tearing your gear. To stay still is to invite the cold to settle in. Energy management is the ultimate currency. In a normal environment, a human needs 2,000 calories to function. Here, to keep the internal furnace burning against the sub-zero onslaught, you need 6,000, maybe 8,000. You are a biological engine burning through fuel just to maintain a baseline temperature of 98.6 degrees. Without food, your body begins to eat itself. It consumes the fat first, then moves to the muscle, and finally, it begins to shut down non-essential systems. Digestion slows. Peripheral circulation retreats to the core to protect the heart and brain. Your hands and feet become cold, heavy weights that you must drag through the snow. Shelter is the next desperate requirement. You cannot stay in the wind. The wind chill factor can drop a pH, manageable -10 degrees to a lethal -60. You must find a way to trap air. Air is the only thing that truly insulates. Whether it is digging a trench in the lee of a snowdrift, or carving blocks for a rudimentary quinsy, the goal is the same: create a microclimate. Inside a well-constructed snow shelter, The temperature can rise to just above freezing, even if it is 40 below outside. It feels like a palace, but it is a claustrophobic one. The smell of damp wool and recycled breath becomes your only world. You sit in the dark, listening to the wind roar overhead like a freight train, knowing that only a few inches of packed snow stand between you and a frozen grave. In the belly of a snow shelter, time loses its meaning. The ticking of a watch becomes a rhythmic heartbeat, a reminder that the world outside still exists, even if it feels a universe away. The darkness is absolute, save for the faint, ethereal glow that filters through the packed snow walls when the moon is high. This is where the mental breakdown begins for the unprepared. In the Arctic, the silence is not empty. It is heavy. It presses against your eardrums until you begin to hear things, the phantom sound of a distant engine, the calling of a name, the crunch of footsteps that aren't your own. This is the Arctic hysteria, a trick of the mind starved of sensory input and gripped by the terror of the void. To survive the first night, you must become a machine of conservation. Every movement must be deliberate. If you drop your mitten, you don't just pick it up. You ensure your hand is protected by a liner first. Losing a glove in a blizzard is not an inconvenience. It is an amputation waiting to happen. The cold moves like a predator, seeking out the smallest gap in your armor, a zipper not fully closed, a seam that has frayed, a boot that is laced too tight, restricting the vital flow of blood to your toes. Blood is your internal antifreeze, and once the flow slows, the frost moves in like a creeping gray shadow. Hydration becomes the next silent killer. People often forget to drink in the cold because the thirst mechanism is suppressed, but the Arctic air is bone dry. Every breath you exhale carries away a puff of moisture, dehydrating your blood and making it thicker, harder for your heart to pump. Finding water is a grueling labor. You cannot eat snow. Its crystalline structure requires more energy for your body to melt than the hydration it provides is worth. You must find ice solder, blue ice if possible, as it has less salt and melted over a precious flame or against your own body heat in a flask. It is a slow, agonizing process of trade-offs. Do you spend your limited fuel to drink, or do you save it for warmth? As dawn breaks on the second day, the whiteout often descends. This is a meteorological phenomenon where the light becomes so diffused by clouds and snow that shadows vanish completely. The horizon disappears. There is no up, no down, no distance. Walking in a whiteout is like walking inside a ping pong ball. Survivors have been known to walk off cliffs or into open leads of water simply because they couldn't see the ground beneath their feet. In these moments, the only choice is to stay still. To move is to die. You must hunker down, buried in the snow like a hibernating animal, waiting for the sky to break. The landscape itself is a shifting jigsaw puzzle. On the frozen ocean, the ice is never truly still. You can hear it groaning a deep, tectonic bass note that vibrates through the solace of your boots. Huge slabs of ice, miles long, grind against one another with the force of millions of tons. They create pressure ridges, jagged walls of ice shards that can rise 30 feet high, turning a flat plain into an obstacle course of razor-sharp glass. Below that ice is the black, killing water of the Arctic Ocean. If the ice cracks beneath you, the shock of the water triggers the cold shock response. Your lungs gasp involuntarily. If your head is underwater, you drown instantly. If you stay on the surface, You have perhaps 3 minutes before your muscles lose the ability to move. The survivor looks out over this wasteland and realizes that nature is not trying to kill them. Nature simply does not care if they live. There is a profound, terrifying freedom in that realization. To live, you must strip away everything that makes you a modern human. You are no longer a person with a name, a job, or a history. You are a biological entity fighting for one more minute of warmth, one more ounce of energy, and one more day of sight. The Arctic is the ultimate judge, and its verdict is written in the frost that clings to your eyelashes, turning your vision into a blurred, crystalline haze of survival. The second day in the wasteland is often where the body begins its first major revolt. This is the stage of metabolic debt, your muscles, having spent 24 hours, shivering and involuntary, reflex designed to generate heat through friction are now screaming with lactic acid. Shivering is exhausting. It is the body's last-ditch effort to keep the core temperature from plummeting, but it burns through glycogen stores at an alarming rate. When the shivering stops and you are still cold, it is a sign of extreme danger. It means the body has run out of fuel to fight. In this state, the survivor's greatest obsession becomes the spark. In the Arctic, fire is more than just warmth. It is a psychological anchor. It is the only thing that separates a human from the frozen beasts that roam the perimeter of the vision. But creating fire in a sub-zero vacuum is a masterclass in frustration. Matchsticks become brittle and snap like dry twigs. Lighter fluid refuses to vaporize in the extreme cold. Even if you have a spark, what do you burn? There are no trees here, no dry brush, only the occasional scrub of frozen lichen or the salvaged debris from a wreck. The search for fuel leads to a grim understanding of the environment. You look for seal oil or animal fats if you are lucky enough to be near a kill site, or you cannibalize your own equipment. You might burn the foam from a seat cushion or the rubber from a boot sole, breathing in the toxic, black smoke just to feel a momentary radiation of heat against your cracked palms. This heat is deceptive. It thaws the surface of your skin, but the air around you remains a hungry void, waiting to suck that heat away the moment the flame flickers out. As the light begins to fail for a second time, the blue hour arrives. This is the period after the sun has dipped, below the horizon but before the total darkness of the polar night sets in. The world turns a deep, bruised indigo. It is the most beautiful and most lethal time of day. The temperature drops another 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. The air becomes so heavy with ice crystals that it feels like breathing powdered glass. Each inhalation triggers a cough, and each cough tears at the lining of your throat. You begin to notice the Arctic mask forming on your face. This is a layer of ice created by your own breath, freezing onto your scarf, your beard, or the fur of your parka hood. It becomes a heavy, frozen weight that you cannot easily remove without tearing skin. Your eyelashes may freeze shut, requiring you to use the warmth of your fingertips to melt the ice just so you can see the encroaching shadows. It is in this blue darkness that the first predators often appear, not the bears, but the hallucinations. The mind, starved of heat and oxygen, starts to play the game of voices. You hear the sound of a telephone ringing in the middle of a glacier. You see the warm glow of a cabin window that turns out to be nothing more than a trick of the moonlight on a slab of blue ice. To follow these visions is to wander into a crevasse. The survivor must remain tethered to the brutal, physical reality of the snow beneath their feet. Every finger movement, every blink, and every shallow breath is a conscious decision. In the Arctic wasteland, the moment you stop thinking about staying alive is the moment you begin to die. You are now a ghost inhabiting a freezing shell, pushing forward into a white void that has no end. As the second night deepens, the true scale of the Arctic wasteland reveals itself in the sky. The aurora borealis, the northern lights, begin their silent, ghostly dance across the firmament. To a poet, they are ribbons of emerald and violet. To a survivor, they are a terrifying reminder of how thin the atmosphere is and how exposed they are to the cosmic cold. The lights offer no warmth. They are a cold fire, illuminating a landscape that looks more like the surface of the moon than the earth. Beneath this celestial display, the temperature plunges toward the killing zone, where mercury freezes and the very air seems to solidify. By now, the survivor's extremities have entered a state of vasoconstriction. The brain, in its ancient, reptilian wisdom, has decided that the fingers and toes are expendable. It pulls the blood toward the core, huddling it around the heart, lungs, and liver. The hands become wooden. Simple tasks, like pulling a zipper or striking a flint, become Herculean efforts requiring the use of the entire arm as a club. You look at your hands and they no longer feel like yours. They are pale, waxy appendages that belong to a stranger. This is the stage where many lose the will to struggle. The cold sleep begins to beckon a seductive, overwhelming lethargy that whispers that it is okay to close your eyes for just 5 minutes. But in the Arctic, 5 minutes is forever. The hunger is now a physical ache, a gnawing beast inside the stomach that rivals the cold outside. Without calories, the body cannot produce heat. You begin to crave fat, not sugar or bread, but pure, raw tallow. This is rabbit starvation, a condition where the body has protein but no fat to process it, leading to a wasting death despite having a full stomach. The survivor scans the horizon for any sign of life, but the wasteland is empty. The birds have flown south, and the lemmings are deep beneath the snow. You are the only warm thing for 100 miles, a tiny candle flickering in a walk-in freezer the size of a continent. Communication with the outside world is a dead hope. Radio batteries, drained by the sub-zero temperatures, have flickered out. The electronic screens have cracked or turned into sluggish smears of liquid crystal. You are truly off the map. Every decision you make from this point forward is a life or death calculation. Do you stay in your shelter and hope for a rescue that may never come? Or do you begin the long, suicidal trek toward a coastline that might be hundreds of miles away? To move is to burn energy you don't have. To stay is to wait for the ice to become your shroud. The wind picks up again, carrying diamond dust, tiny, sharp ice crystals that hang in the air. They glitter in the moonlight, beautiful and deadly, as they find their way into your lungs, causing you to cough up flecks of frozen blood. Your skin, once supple, is now as dry as parchment, cracking open at the knuckles and lips. There is no moisture here, only ice. You realize then that the Arctic is not just a place. It is a predator that eats time, flesh, and spirit. As the dawn of the third day approaches, the survivor is no longer the person who started this journey. They have been stripped down to the bone, a raw nerve ending of pure survival instinct, staring into the white teeth of the wasteland. By the third dawn, the physical world has shrunk to the size of your parka hood. The horizon, once a distant promise, has become a gray blur that merges with the sky. Your eyes are swollen, the lids heavy with ice blink, temporary blindness caused by the relentless reflection of ultraviolet light off the snow. Even without direct sunlight, the sheer whiteness of the wasteland is an assault on the retinas. You find yourself squinting through the narrow slits of your fingers, trying to find a single dark point in a world of blinding purity. This is the white silence that Jack London wrote of, a silence so profound it rings in your ears, like a high-pitched frequency. Your body is now entering a state of autophagy. With no external fuel, your metabolism begins to dismantle non-essential muscle tissue to feed the brain and heart. Your movements become jerky and uncoordinated. Your cognitive functions begin to fray at the edges. Simple math, like counting your remaining matches or calculating the hours of daylight left, becomes an impossible puzzle. You find yourself staring at your boots for 20 minutes, forgotten in a trance of exhaustion. This is the Arctic fog of the mind, a precursor to the final shutdown. The thirst is now more agonizing than the hunger. Your tongue feels like a piece of dry leather, and your throat is so constricted that swallowing feels like passing a stone. You look at the infinite expanse of frozen water surrounding you and realize the cruel irony of the Arctic. You are dying of thirst in a desert of water. You try to tuck a small piece of ice into your cheek to melt it, but it only freezes the inside of your mouth, causing the delicate membranes to peel away. The pain is a sharp electric reminder that you are still alive, but it is a flickering flame. The struggle for survival in the Arctic is a war fought at the molecular level. Inside the shivering shell of a human being, a desperate triage is taking place. When the core temperature begins to slide, the brain acts as a cold-blooded commander, sacrificing the perimeter to save the citadel. It constricts the blood vessels in the hands and feet, pulling the warm lifeblood inward to protect the heart and lungs. This is why the first thing you lose is your dexterity. Your fingers become wooden, unfeeling claws. You look at them and know they are yours, but they no longer obey the commands of a freezing mind. This is the body's way of buying time, but it is a currency that devalues with every breath. As the cold penetrates deeper, the very chemistry of your blood begins to change. It thickens, becoming a sluggish, icy sludge that the heart must labor to pump. Every beat becomes an effort. Every breath of sub-zero air chills the blood as it passes through the lungs, sending a fresh wave of ice back toward the core. You are essentially cooling yourself from the inside out. This is the stage of profound exhaustion where the umbles take over. You stumble over flat ground because your nerves can no longer tell your brain where your feet are. You mumble because the muscles in your jaw are stiffening. You fumble with zippers and matches because the fine motor skills have evaporated into the frost. Then comes the most dangerous deception of all, the transition from pain to numbness. When the nerves freeze, the screaming stops. A survivor might feel a strange, detached sense of peace. The biting wind no longer seems to hurt. This is the cold sleep calling. It is a seductive lethargy that whispers that the struggle is over, that the snow looks like a soft, white bed. If you give in to this urge, the brain begins to misfire. In the final moments of hypothermia, a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing occurs. The brain, starved of oxygen and heat, sends a final, frantic signal to the blood vessels to dilate. Suddenly, the survivor feels a rush of intense, burning heat. In a state of total delirium, they tear off their clothes, convinced they are on fire, only to succumb to the frost in minutes. Beyond the core, the skin itself undergoes a crystalline transformation. Frostbite is the literal freezing of the water within your cells. Tiny, jagged ice shards form between the layers of flesh, puncturing cell walls like microscopic glass. If you touch your cheek, it feels like cold marble. There is no bounce back, no warmth, just the waxy rigidity of a corpse. If you are lucky enough to find heat, the thawing process is a fresh hell. As the ice crystals melt and the blood attempts to return to the shredded tissue, the pain is explosive. It is the feeling of 1,000 needles being driven into the bone. But in the wasteland, thawing is a luxury. Most often, the frozen limb stays frozen, a dead weight that you must drag through the snow as you search for a way out of the white void. The only way to fight this biological shutdown is through the consumption of pure, raw energy. In the Arctic, you do not eat for flavor. You eat for fire. Your body becomes a furnace that requires a massive amount of fuel just to maintain a baseline of 98 degrees. You crave fat with a primal intensity that borders on madness. A piece of lean meat will not save you. Without fat, your body will waste away even on a full stomach. You need the dense, oily calories of blubber or tallow to keep the internal spark alive. Without it, the fire goes out, and you become just another permanent fixture of the Arctic landscape, a frozen monument to the indifference of the North. The fourth night brings a new level of atmospheric hostility. The air becomes so heavy with frozen moisture that a fog of ice crystals, known as frost smoke, rises from the ground. Every time you exhale, the moisture from your breath doesn't just dissipate. It instantly turns into a cloud of needles that clings to your face. This ice mask builds up layer by layer, sealing your parka hood to your skin. You are trapped inside your own freezing breath. The weight of the ice on your eyelashes makes it difficult to keep your eyes open, and the salt from your tears stings as it freezes against your cracked cheeks. Underneath the layers of clothing, your skin is losing its elasticity. Dehydration in the Arctic is a silent thief. Because the air is so dry, it sucks the moisture out of your body with every movement. Your blood volume drops, making your heart work twice as hard to keep you warm. You feel a dizziness that isn't just from hunger, but from the thickening of your very life force. To find water, you must spend hours huddled over a tiny, flickering flame melting snow that yields only a fraction of its volume in liquid. It is a slow, agonizing process that tests the limits of human patience. You sit there, watching the silver droplets form, knowing that each sip is a temporary reprieve from the inevitable. As you push further into the wasteland, the landscape itself begins to feel like a living entity. The ice is never silent. It groans and cracks, with a sound like a distant cannon. Fire as the tides shift beneath the frozen crust. These sounds echo across the flat plains, making it impossible to tell if the danger is a mile away or right beneath your boots. Sometimes, the ice heaves up into pressure ridges jagged, blue-tinted walls of broken slabs that look like the ruins of a glass city. Climbing over them is a nightmare of sharp edges and unstable footing. One slip can mean a broken bone, and in the Arctic, a broken bone is a slow death sentence. The hunger is no longer a sharp pain. It has become a dull, hollow ache that radiates from your spine. Your body is now systematically consuming its own fat stores, and when those are gone, it begins to break down the muscles in your legs and arms. You can feel yourself becoming lighter, weaker, and more fragile. Your mind starts to wander to memories of heat, the smell of a kitchen, the steam from a cup of coffee, the feeling of sun on your back. These memories are dangerous. The fifth day is when the Arctic begins to steal your sanity. In this vast, featureless world, your brain loses its ability to process depth and distance. You might see a dark shape on the horizon and walk toward it for hours, only to realize it was a tiny pebble just a few yards away, magnified by the strange, shimmering light of the ice. This is the whiteout of the soul, where the boundary between the sky and the snow vanishes completely. You feel as though you are floating in a void, suspended in a cold, white marble. Without the sun to guide you, you begin to walk in circles. Your internal compass is broken by the magnetic pull of the Pays de Giv of the Vafé, north, and the sheer exhaustion of your spirit. You find yourself talking to the wind, shouting into the gale just to hear the sound of a human voice. The silence is so heavy it feels like a physical presence, a weight on your chest that grows heavier with every mile. Your mind begins to populate the wasteland with shadows. You see figures moving just at the edge of your vision-lost explorers, family members, or monstrous creatures born of your own feverish imagination. You know they aren't real, but the loneliness is so profound that you find yourself welcoming the hallucinations. It is easier to talk to a ghost than to face the reality that you are the last living thing in a dead world. Physical movement has become a rhythmic, mechanical torture. Your joints are stiff, and every step feels like your bones are grinding against one another. The cold has seeped into the very marrow of your skeleton. You no longer feel the individual stings of the wind. Instead, there is only a dull, crushing sensation of being flattened by the atmosphere. Your skin has turned a grayish, translucent hue, and the cracks in your hands have begun to bleed, the blood freezing almost instantly into dark, rusted lines across your knuckles. You are becoming a part of the landscape, a walking sculpture of ice and desperation. Then comes the ice lead, the most terrifying obstacle of the frozen sea. A massive crack opens in the ice, revealing a river of black, steaming water that cuts across your path. The water is so cold it is actually below freezing, kept liquid only by its salt content and the movement of the tides. To fall into this water is to experience a shock so violent that your heart can stop instantly. If you manage to scramble out, the water on your clothes will freeze into a suit of armor within seconds, snapping your movement and sealing your fate. You stand at the edge of the black abyss, watching the frost smoke rise, realizing that only a few inches of frozen crust separate you from an eternal, watery grave. As the sun dips below the horizon for the fifth time, the temperature falls into a realm that the human mind cannot truly comprehend. It is a cold so intense that it feels like fire. It burns your lungs when you breathe and sears your eyes when you look into the wind. You realize that you have reached the limits of human endurance. You are no longer fighting to get home. You are fighting to see the next minute. Every calorie you have left is being burned in a final, flickering effort to keep your heart beating. You huddle in the lee of a snowdrift, listening to the ice groan and scream, waiting for a dawn that feels like it may never come. You are a survivor of the wasteland, but the wasteland is winning, inch by frozen inch. The transition into the sixth day brings a shift in the bitad environment from the frozen sea to the jagged coastline of the interior. Here, the geography changes from flat ice to a vertical nightmare of wind-scoured stone and ancient glaciers. The wind, channeled through narrow mountain passes, reaches speeds that can lift a grown man off his feet. It carries with it the black blizzard, not of snow, but of pulverized rock and frozen grit that strips the finish off gear and scours the skin raw. Survival here requires more than just endurance. It requires the instinct of a burrowing animal. You are no longer at the top of the food chain. You are a small, shivering creature looking for a hole to hide in. The quest for shelter becomes the singular focus of the day. You cannot build an igloo here. The snow is too dry, too crystalline, like mounds of sugar that refuse to hold a shape. Instead, you must seek out the lee, the side of a boulder, or a cliff face that is protected from the direct onslaught of the gale. You use your remaining strength to dig into a snowbank, carving out a shallow trench just wide enough for your body. This is a grave for the living, a snow coffin designed to trap the heat of your own breath. As you crawl inside, the sound of the wind changes from a roar to a muffled thud. The silence inside the snow is terrifying. It is the silence of the earth itself, waiting for you to stop moving. Inside this cramped dark, the Arctic thirst returns with a vengeance. Your body, struggling to process its own muscle tissue for energy, produces toxic waste products that require water to flush out. But every drop of water costs you heat. You hold a piece of ice against your neck, hoping your pulse will melt it into a few precious sips. The cold from the ice radiates into your carotid artery, sending a chill directly to your brain, making your vision swim and your head throb. You are trading your core temperature for hydration, a bargain that you lose every time you make it. As the hours pass in the dark, the polar night begins to feel permanent. The cycles of light and dark have blurred into a single, gray smudge of existence. Your circadian rhythm is shattered. You sleep for 10 minutes and wake up convinced that hours have passed. You find yourself checking your pulse constantly, pressing your stiff fingers against your throat to make sure the drum is still beating. The rhythm is slow, heavy, and sluggish. Your heart is tired. It has been beating against the cold for over 100 hours without rest or fuel. It is a muscle like any other, and it is reaching its breaking point. Suddenly, the ground beneath you vibrates. It is not the wind, but the movement of a glacier, a river of ice miles long and hundreds of feet deep, moving with the weight of an empire. The ice groans as it slides over the bedrock, a sound that vibrates in your very teeth. Crevasses, hidden by thin bridges of wind-blown snow, crisscross the path ahead like trapdoors. One step on a snow bridge, and you could fall 100 feet into a blue-lit cathedral of ice where no one would ever find you. You realize that the wasteland is not just a surface. It is a three-dimensional labyrinth of traps, and you are walking through it blind, exhausted, and nearly broken. The arrival of the seventh day marks the threshold of human capability. At this point, the physical body is no longer a machine. It is a ghost. The fat stores are gone, the muscle tissue is being scavenged by the blood, and the brain is operating on a primitive emergency frequency. This is the stage of the long stare, where a survivor can sit motionless for an hour, looking at a single patch of ice lost in a neurological fog. The world has ceased to be a place of geography and has become a place of pure, white pain. Every breath is a conscious effort, a mechanical expansion of the chest that feels like it might crack the ribs. The landscape begins to change as you descend toward the frozen fjords. The ice here is different stained, with the salt of the sea and the minerals of the earth. It is a chaotic graveyard of burgee, bits and growlers, chunks of glacial ice that have broken, often frozen into the pack. They stand like jagged tombstones in the half-light. You find yourself navigating through a forest of frozen glass, where the reflections play tricks on your tired mind. You see the flicker of a fire that isn't there. You hear the chime of a bell that belongs to a church 1,000 miles away. These are the sirens of the snow, the final hallucinations that lead a man to sit down and give up. Your hands have lost all sensation, but they have taken on a life of their own. They are swollen, the skin split and blackened at the tips. You no longer use them to grip. You use them as hooks. To move a piece of equipment or to adjust your hood, you must move your entire arm from the shoulder. The simple act of living has become a series of complex, agonizing maneuvers. You look down at your boots and realize they are no longer footwear. They are just heavy blocks of ice attached to the ends of your legs. You don't feel them hit the ground anymore. You only feel the jar of the impact traveling up your spine, a rhythmic vibration that tells you that you are still moving forward. The wind has dropped, but the cold has intensified. This is the clear sky death. Without the clouds to trap the Earth's heat, the radiation escapes into space, and the temperature craters into a realm where the air itself feels liquid. It is so cold that when you blink, your eyelids stick together for a fraction of a second. It is so cold that the moisture in your eyes begins to crystallize, blurring your vision with a veil of frost. In this absolute stillness, you hear the song of the ice, a high-pitched, metallic ringing caused by the rapid contraction of the frozen ground. It is the sound of the world shrinking, tightening its grip on everything that remains. As the sun makes its brief, mocking appearance on the horizon, you spot something that isn't white or gray. It is a flash of color, a piece of wreckage, an old marker, or perhaps the dark silhouette of an abandoned hunter's shack. Your heart gives a sudden, violent thump, a surge of adrenaline that burns through your veins like acid. This is the final gamble. Your body has been holding its last reserves for this very moment. You begin to crawl, the rhythmic scraping of your parka against the crust, of the snow the only sound in the world. You are a creature of pure will, a survivor of the Arctic wasteland, refusing to become part of the white silence until the very last spark of your life is extinguished. In the heart of the Arctic wasteland, the sky is no longer your ceiling. The snow must become your walls. By the 8th day, the survivor understands a fundamental truth. The wind is the primary executioner. To stay above the surface is to offer your life to the gale. Survival now dictates a descent into the earth, or rather into the frozen white skin that covers it. This is the architecture of ice, where you must learn to use the very element trying to kill you as your only shield. It is a desperate irony to find warmth. You must bury yourself in a tomb of frozen water. The first lesson in ice engineering is the physics of the snow trench. When the energy to build a complex structure is gone, you must use gravity and the wind. You find a deep snowdrift on the leeward side of a rock and begin to carve. The snow here is not the soft, fluffy powder of a winter postcard. It has been hammered by the wind into a substance as dense as plaster. You cut blocks, not with a saw, but with a knife or a sharp piece of debris, feeling the resistance of the crystals. You dig a hole 3 feet deep, just wide enough for your shoulders, and roof it with slabs of packed snow leaned against each other in an A-frame. This is the Quincy, a primitive survival cell. Inside, the howling of the world outside is replaced by a thick, suffocating silence that is the most beautiful sound you have ever heard. Within the walls of an ice shelter, the thermodynamics of survival change. The snow acts as a massive insulator, trapping the meager heat radiating from your body. In a well-built trench, the temperature can rise from 40 below zero to a stable 32 degrees. It is still freezing, but to a body that has been battered by the wind, 32 degrees feels like a tropical spring. You lie in the dark, watching the frost from your breath crystallize on the ceiling, forming delicate, fern-like patterns. You must be careful. If the shelter is too airtight, the carbon dioxide from your own lungs will pool at the bottom, silently putting you into a sleep from which you will never wake. You poke a small ventilation hole through the roof with a stick, a tiny chimney that lets in a needle of light and a breath of the killing air you just escaped. But the architecture of ice is fragile. The very heat that keeps you alive begins to melt the interior of your sanctuary. Droplets of water form on the ceiling and begin to drip, soaking into your clothes. In the Arctic, moisture is a slow-motion disaster. You must use your gloved hand to smooth the ceiling into a dome shape, forcing the meltwater to run down the walls instead of dripping onto your chest. You are constantly managing a delicate balance. You need the heat to survive, but the heat threatens to destroy your shelter and turn your clothing into a frozen lead weight. You are an engineer of a world that wants to revert to a solid block of ice the moment you stop moving. As the second week begins, the psychological shift of living underground takes its toll. You are living in a white, claustrophobic box. The walls press in on you. The fear of being buried alive by a fresh blizzard is a constant, gnawing thought. You can hear the snow piling up over your head, the weight of the mountain increasing inch by inch. Every few hours, you must punch through the exit to ensure you aren't sealed in. The effort is exhausting. Your muscles, starved of oxygen and calories, scream at the exertion. But you keep digging, because the moment you lose your connection to the surface is the moment the key, Arctic, claims you as a permanent resident of its deep, frozen history.